This is the ultimate camera showdown of iPhone 14 Pro Max versus iPhone 15 Pro Max. A year difference. Is it time to upgrade? Let's go to work. Let's start with color profile and saturation, and these are two of the most expensive iPhones today. Although there's a year difference between the two, iPhone 14 Pro Max is still an expensive phone compared to other iPhones and Android counterparts. It will be hard to differentiate the colors honestly on a blind test, or if you're not doing a side-by-side comparison, feels like any other flagship iPhones. I bet the colors of iPhone 14 and 15 Pro Max are the same as iPhone 13 Pro Max. Nothing changed much on the colors, same vividness. iPhone tends to produce punchier colors than the competition. Last year's iPhone 14 Pro Max has stronger contrast, and because of that, the colors are really popping out, and it also gives a warmer tone on the images. While the latest iPhone 15 Pro Max is brighter than iPhone 14 Pro Max, although it has an exact main sensor, it has better exposure than last year's, so although the photos are still yellowish, but less warmer than iPhone 14 Pro Max. Looking quickly on the specification, both phones has triple camera setup with ultra-wide, wide, and telephoto. Both main sensor has censorship OIS and dual face detection autofocus, and both of them has the same 12 megapixel ultra-wide with dual face detection autofocus too. The only difference is the telephoto zoom, as the newer iPhone 15 Pro Max now has 5 times optical zoom, but all the rear cameras can shoot 4K at 60 FPS. While the selfie camera is uninspiring because there's no upgrade, both of them is still rocking a 12 megapixel sensor, similar face detection autofocus and OIS, and can shoot up to 4K 60 FPS. Going back to the color profile, it's really hard to notice the difference between the two, and both phones don't have the AI feature like Google Pixel or the Scene Optimizer of Samsung, basically just a plain saturated color science of Apple. And looking at all three sensors, from the ultra-wide, wide, and telephoto, colors are consistent. This is the cinematic mode on both phones. Using the selfie camera, 4K 30 FPS. I think you can use this on video production and vlogging. Going for the portrait mode, I think you'll love any of these two phones because they produce similar looking portrait shots. It's a little controversial in terms of portrait mode on iPhones because they tend to produce warmer skin tone than the competition. Like if you compare the portrait mode of iPhones to like a Pixel phone, people notice that the skin tone are too yellowish. I like that both iPhones are also retouching the portraits a little bit. You would see that on the smoothness of the face and the lips, and I guess even though yellowish, warmer white balance is more enticing and better looking for some, but that's a personal preference. And I believe that the standout feature of iPhone 15 Pro Max is the 5 times optical zoom that gives around 85mm reach. And doing the selfie camera test, I think last year's iPhone 14 Pro Max exposes the face better compared to the newer iPhone 15 Pro Max. iPhone will give you the most natural looking photos on the selfie camera. It's not as flattering as the rear, but it's natural. Next is night shots, and this is the biggest difference between the two iPhones. I think if you're basing the upgrade to iPhone 15 Pro Max from the older iPhone 14s, this is the reason why. To begin with, iPhone 15 Pro Max has better exposure, you would see more information on the shadows, and there's so much details as well. You will still see the grass, while it's all mushy on iPhone 14 Pro Max. Also, the biggest jump here is the colors. I'm still thinking why this is happening because the main sensor of both phones are the same. Not sure if Apple is downgrading the software of iPhone 14 Pro Max for the newer iPhones to stand out. Again, I'm not sure this is just a theory because on papers they both have the same 1/1.28 sensor, almost a 1-inch sensor, but iPhone 15 Pro Max has better exposure. And looking at all three sensors from the ultra-wide, wide, and telephoto, the night shot features are available. This is just a regular selfie video on iPhone 15 Pro Max. And in terms of colors, it's pretty much similar on both phones. And this is the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the older phone. I still think the iPhones 15 Pro are better in terms of video performance. Flaring improved on the new iPhone 15 Pro Max. I noticed that it is not as harsh as last year. The 5 times optical zoom is still unusable, and on low light condition, we still have a little bit of it. In terms of highlights, if you zoom in on the crescent, you will see that there's more information on iPhone 15 Pro Max, so it manages the highlights better. Same with exposure. Again, the images coming out of iPhone 15 Pro Max is brighter than iPhone 14 Pro Max, so on shadows or darker areas, you would see a little bit more on iPhone 15 Pro Max. Talking about close focus or macro mode, both of them has macro capability. And in terms of white balance, both have warm white balance, but iPhone 14 Pro Max is warmer. In terms of sharpness, both of these phones are solid phones. They are tack sharp from the ultra-wide wide and the telephoto zoom, and even on digital crop you can still see or read the text. And lastly, details, 12 megapixel versus 24 megapixel of the new iPhone 15 Pro Max, and both of them has the same level of details, but I guess you have more megapixels to crop in on the new iPhone 15 Pro Max. So that's it for our image test, pretty similar, just a zoom and night shot difference. Now let's talk about the video. In terms of video performance, pretty similar specs on both phones. This is the action mode on iPhone 14 Pro Max and iPhone 15 Pro Max with 2.8K 30 FPS. How's the performance? I think it's pretty good. After the action mode, we will do a stabilization test on all four sensors, starting with the ultra-wide 4K 30 FPS. I'm shaking the phone like crazy, and I think both phones perform similar. This is the main sensor, again, same values, 4K 30 FPS, and since they have the same technology and sensors, I think they're pretty much the same video quality on the main shooter. And this is the optical zoom of both phones, 3 times optical zoom on iPhone 14 Pro Max and 5 times optical zoom on iPhone 15 Pro Max. The stabilization on the last generation is better than the newer. And lastly, the selfie video. And in terms of stabilization and quality, both of them have the same sensor, so I would think that both phones will produce the same kind of quality. This is the cinematic mode of both phones, 4K 30 FPS, and I think the biggest upgrade here is iPhone 15 Pro Max controls the flaring better. Now we're doing the video zoom test, and obviously, iPhone 15 Pro Max will have the farther reach. Now let's quickly test the frame rates, and this is the super slow motion test. And this is the super slow motion test. I think both phones have the same video quality. And lastly, low light video test. And since they have the same sensor, I expect that similar performance on low light video. So this is the ultimate camera shootout of iPhone 14 Pro Max and iPhone 15 Pro Max. Apple never do a complete overhaul of their products, and I expect no different on this comparison test. They love to send those minute changes to improve last generation, and similarly, they have done it once again on the Pro Max version of their iPhone lineup. If you have the iPhone 14 Pro or the Pro Max, I don't think you need to upgrade to the latest and the greatest, but if you're in dying need of the USB-C charger, you may do so, but not the reason of the camera. But if budget is not a problem for you, iPhone 15 Pro Max is better in low light and has a farther reach of 5 times optical zoom. And there we go. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'll continue to compare these two phones in our channel, so stay tuned. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.